Barriers to communication. Introduction. Communication is a smooth transmission of information, ideas, emotions, and feelings, and more importantly, transmission of meaning from one to another, where the intended message, encoded by the sender, is grasped by the receiver and he responds accordingly. But in many cases, we fail to communicate the desired information, knowledge, or emotion, as some barrier crops up between the sender and the receiver, which prevents successful communication, distorts the message, or hampers the process and makes communication meaningless. For example, when we are communicating orally, it may happen that the communication environment is noisy and consequently the receiver of the message is not able to hear us clearly. The noisy environment is a barrier to communication. Barriers to communication is anything that prevents smooth exchange of meaning between two people. It may also happen that two unknown persons accidentally meet and want to communicate but do not have a common language that can be the medium in which they can communicate. Or maybe when we are writing, if our handwriting is illegible or we use very subject specific jargon which the receiver has no knowledge of, and then the communication would not achieve its desired goal. In these cases, illegible handwriting or the highly specialized jargonized language are barriers to communication. In short, it can be said that barriers to communication can simply be defined as anything that prevents the smooth exchange of meaning between a sender and receiver. In the field of business communication, the communication barrier or any unwanted interference between the speaker, encoder, and the receiver which hampers the communication flow is termed as noise. Noise does not merely refer to the physical noise but to any barrier that prevents the flow of communication. If the barrier or the noise is of a technological nature, then it can easily be avoided as technical snags can be corrected easily. Suppose you are in a basement of a building where the reception of a mobile network is not very good and you receive a call. It is always advised that you move out of the basement to let the communication be smooth. But if the noise or the barrier is due to some human error, then it takes a long time and sustained effort to correct, as the human errors are linked to one's habits and psychology. For example, if one has a problem of always assuming a sense of superiority whenever communicating, then it can easily become a deterrent for others to be attentive to her or his thoughts and emotions. The person's sense of superiority can lead others to feel that they are deliberately and consciously being underrated, leading them to be detached or indifferent to the message being communicated. Classification of barriers to communication. Noise or barriers can be of two kinds. 1. Channel noise. 2. Semantic noise. The difference between the channel noise and semantic noise can be summarized as: channel noise develops externally, that is, external to the message, whereas semantic noise is internal to the message. Channel noise. When there is any unwanted interference or snag in the medium of communication process, it is termed as channel noise. For example, a noisy marketplace and illegible handwriting can be termed as channel noise, as in both the cases the factors that create communication failure are not an intrinsic part of the message. In one case, it is the communication environment which is not suitable for communication, and in the other, the medium of communication, that is, writing, is not readable. There can be many kinds of channel noise. Below are some of the causes with examples of channel noise. Physical noise in the channel. Undesirable physical noise is a great barrier to communication. Any physical noise which is not related to the communication process can cause a barrier. Use of inappropriate media. Inappropriate selection of media to communicate messages can lead to miscommunication or may not have the desired result. For example, you are the manager of a company which is bidding for a tender, Will it be possible to bid for tender using oral communication? Oral communication is an inappropriate media for a bid for tender. Multiple transfer stations. If a clerical staff of an organization figures out a mistake in some document and wants to communicate it to the director and informs his higher official, who then informs his superior and then his superior to the director, then it may happen that because of the multiple transfer stations, the content of the message is lost. It may also happen that the message changes in its tone and meaning because of it being transferred too many times, which hampers the communication. Information overload. A message should only provide that much information as is required to understand it. Too much of information can lead to a situation where the intended message is lost. Fear of superiors. It often happens that one wants to pass on some information to one's superior, but he cannot do it as he feels that the senior would get offended. Often the way superior would react makes us not to communicate what we truly feel or think, which can be a major barrier to smooth functioning of an organization. Negative presuppositions. One usually has a feeling that a memo is always issued to seek clarification or to warn or to inform, whereas a memo can also be issued to congratulate someone. People have a negative presupposition about memos. So when someone gets news that her friend got a memo, she starts feeling bad without any reason. Communication selectivity. When we are selective in our listening, it can be a barrier to communication. It can also be a significant barrier when one decides to read only parts of a document. Poor listening. If one is a poor listener, then it can itself be a barrier to communication. Listening is a significant thing in the process of communication. Semantic noise. Semantic noise can be defined as noise or barrier that is generated from within a message. As language is connotative, that is, meaning of a word is not always stated directly and can also be implied. Therefore, the communication process fails many times as the same word is interpreted differently by different people. For example, if someone says that the bark is strong, then the meaning of the sentence will depend on the context in which it is spoken. In one context, it may mean a dog's bark, and in another, the bark of a tree. So, if the context is not given to us, then the meaning becomes inaccessible. Sometimes, ambiguity in the language may also cause semantic noise. For example, if one says, I saw Ravi going with some old men and women, one is not sure whether the adjective old applies only to the men or also to the women. There can be numerous such examples of semantic noise. Below are some of the causes with examples of semantic noise. Limited vocabulary. Limited vocabulary can become a significant barrier to communication as it can create not only a problem in understanding things but also may lead to a situation where the person is not able to express what he intends to express. One also has to keep in mind that having an extensive vocabulary does not always ensure that one would be a good communicator. For effective communication, one should know which words to use in which circumstances. Moreover, words have their literal meaning, denotative, as well as symbolic, connotative meaning. One should have knowledge about both to use them in right situations and also to comprehend them when they are used by others. Incompatibility between verbal and non-verbal language. We communicate not only with our words but also with non-verbal cues, dress, eye contact, physical touch, facial expressions, gestures, postures, etc. Often we use non-verbal cues for body language consciously, but many a times the non-verbal cues are unconscious. It is essential that our gestures and postures are compatible with our words. Whenever it is not so, we are misinterpreted or misunderstood. Varied perception due to different backgrounds, such as cultural. Each one of us perceives the same incident or entity in a different way, which can lead to communication failure. For example, the librarian of your college called a library meeting to discuss the issue of books being stolen from the library. The chairperson of the committee came to the meeting and pointed out that stealing of books suggests that the students are interested in gaining knowledge and recommended that all books to be replaced at the most security measures can be tightened. Many others in the meeting felt that this was not the solution, yet they did not say anything as they did not dare to oppose the chair. This is an example of varied perception because of the ways in which we try to look at the world. Our background decides the way we interpret a message. To a poor person who is suffering from hunger, the beauty of a full moon does not appeal. Our social, cultural, financial, educational, and psychological background decides the way we try to make sense of the things around us, including words. Thus, while one communicates, if he does not keep in mind the background of the audience or the receiver and communicate accordingly, then there is always a chance that he will be misunderstood or misinterpreted. Wrong assumptions and interferences. Wrong assumptions can often lead to miscommunication. Suppose there is a string of letters that are written by two departments regarding a certain issue, and one department writes a letter to the other department without referring to the earlier communications. In this regard, when the head of the other department has changed, there is always a chance that the letter would not serve its purpose. Blocked categories, categorical thinking. In general, we react positively to an information only if it is in consonance with our own views and attitudes. Conversely, when we receive information that does not conform to our personal views, habits, and attitudes, or appears unfavorable to us, we tend to react negatively or even disbelieve it. Rejection, distortion, and avoidance are three common, undesirable, and negative reactions to unfavorable information. For example, you think that you can never deal with matters related to accounts as you are very poor in that field. So, whenever any document reaches you from the accounts section, you immediately pass on the work to someone else, thinking that you will not be able to handle it. This is an example of blocked categories. Emotional, psychological, unsettled state. It is true that none of us can be unemotional, as emotions are an integral part of human life, but when emotions are not moderated, they can become a barrier to communication. It can lead to a situation where one reacts negatively to situations which can act as barriers to communication. Strategies to overcome barriers to communication. If one desires to be an effective communicator, then one needs to learn ways to avoid barriers or noise so that communication failures do not happen. When a particular communication fails to evoke any response or the desired response because of some noise or barrier to communication, then the following steps can be help to solve the problem. Identify the problem, find the cause or barrier, work on alternative solutions, opt for the best solution, follow up rigorously. The first step is to identify the problem. When we can identify the problem, then we can find a solution for it. To identify the problem, it is necessary that one analyzes the feedback or the lack of it carefully. Once the barrier is located, then one can figure out easily the cause of the barrier and can look for all possible solutions. The best solution should then be opted for and then followed consciously so that the barrier does not crop up again. Listening. It is important to speak well, but it is more significant to be a good listener. Listening is not the same thing as hearing. We hear many sounds coming to us from various corners, but we do not bother to fathom the significance of all these sounds. It is only to some sounds we turn our attentive ears as they mean something significant to us. It is important to listen carefully as it is the first step towards being a better communicator. When one is listening carefully, one communicates the message that he is serious. There are many kinds of listening. Evaluative listening. While listening to the argument in a board meeting, the directors of the company evaluate the arguments of the speaker while listening. It can be called evaluative listening. Discriminative listening. Suppose in the annual dinner of a company, the director is chatting with all the staff of the organization informally, where some are listening to what he's saying while others are busy with their own discussions. This can be an example of discriminative listening. Appreciative listening. When one listens with a kind of appreciation for what is spoken, it is called appreciative listening. For example, if someone is presenting the financial report of a company and people are nodding heads in appreciation, it can be an example of appreciative listening. Emphatic listening. When one listens to the speaker with empathy or sympathy, then it is called emphatic listening. For example, if in a negotiation one party is presenting his point of view and the other party sympathizes with his point of view, then it can be called emphatic listening.